Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now here in my hands, my Ruger 10/22 in the Hunter X22 stock. Now this is not the way it comes. In fact, this used to be FDE, but you can see here decked out in this awesome Kuiu camo. Now there are a number of camo patterns that I definitely gravitate towards. There's 3 or 4 of them, but the Kuiu Vias definitely one that has my attention. And well, as you can see, not only do I have my jacket, but I have knives in my TFK T17 lineup, my Mossberg 590, and again, my Ruger 10/22, all of which have a level of Kuiu Vias, which again, I do greatly enjoy. Now, this was done using a GunSkin. And so the people at GunSkins do make a number of different types of vinyl wraps for different types of firearms. So everything from your handguns to shotguns, and here, the rifle, and all kinds of other accessories. Very, very cool. So what we're gonna do today, I'm gonna go through the process of actually using their shotgun and rifle kit. Here again on my Ruger 10/22, and then a small project on my Mossberg 590. You're gonna get to see what it takes to prepare this, get it all ready, put the gun skin on, and well, I've definitely learned some tips and tricks along the way. But with that said, I have a whole bunch to do and a whole bunch to share with you. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm about to get into, do me a favor, stay tuned. Now, before we get too far, I would like to say thank you very much to the people at GunSkins who did provide this for review. Now, as I mentioned, this is the rifle and shotgun skin in the color Kuiu Vias. This for me is a camouflage pattern that I greatly enjoy. So going through the different components to the kit here, you'll see these are each individually labeled, so it is very clear as to exactly what you're getting into. Now, one of the things that I found is it is really worth taking your time up front and thinking about how you're going to approach this. This is definitely a project that needs a few things. First and foremost, you're going to need some good X-Acto blades. You're going to need a hot air gun. But more than anything else, get yourself a nice coffee. Hopefully you have something solid to watch on TV and keep you just a little bit occupied. But then you also need yourself a good amount of time to get this done. From preparation all the way through the end of installation, it's really a number of hours. I spent in excess of 3 hours to get this done. But you can see the very first thing for me, taking my firearm and fully disassembling it. I really wanted to get everything fully disassembled so that I could do the best job possible getting this gun skin nice and into place. Now, the first impression that I have is this is a project that anybody definitely can do. Like any medium, it's going to take some practice. You're going to have to really take your time and figure it out. And you definitely want to get yourself some momentum as you build into the project. So take your time, prepare everything as best as you possibly can, and just get into a good mindset. Take your time. Do not rush and really plan it out carefully. So you can see I am taking my time to dry fit everything, think about it ahead of time, and really try to learn some lessons literally before I even got started. Even things like, for example, taking some pictures ahead of time to make sure I understood what was going to happen once I started covering up my stock. Now, you can see I took the measure twice, cut once approach and realized I made a little bit of a mistake as I was laying this out. If you're not careful, you could leave yourself short on coverage. So, well, luckily I caught it before I actually cut this. And quite honestly, even with something like a Sharpie that is a permanent marker, a little bit of rubbing alcohol was more than enough to easily remove the mark. It actually did a fantastic job, so no problem at all. So a Sharpie, no problem. This actually worked out just fine. But taking some time to realign, making sure that I actually got the appropriate amount of coverage on the gun skin onto the stock, redrawing my line, and at this point feeling much better. Again, paying off to measure twice and cut once. The vinyl cuts with ease. Some good sharp scissors will do, or even that X-Acto knife, and I found it was advantageous to save all of my extras. Make sure you clean your stock very well. Because this was a brand new stock, I really only needed a little bit of rubbing alcohol. I had never even fired with this, but they do advise if you're going to use a stock that has already been fired and has some grime, to use a good cleaner, a good degreaser, and they actually recommend specifically Frog Lube. But again, taking my time and aligning the gun skin, I decided for my project, I really wanted to start in a place where I could gain some momentum. So a nice, big, wide, flat surface that would allow me to learn how this was to work with and really, again, gain some momentum. So instead of starting in the trickier spots, I thought I would start in a place that was actually relatively simple. Now, the other impression that I have is sometimes you need to cut this to get it to fit into place and to wrap appropriately. Now, every firearm is going to be different. Every angle, every little bit and piece, and all the different crevices and the different areas you need to work this vinyl into, it's going to differ. So between cutting it and applying heat, you definitely can work with this. And one of the things that I like is it's fairly forgiving. So even if you wrap it and you decide you need to remove it and sort of shift positions, you can definitely do that without causing too much damage. Now, you definitely want to be careful to avoid wrinkles, but once you get things kind of firm and flat and into place, a little bit of heat, a little bit of finesse, and a little bit of rubbing and pushing everything into place and really seating it goes a long way. And again, every now and then you might need to make some little cuts to get things to actually fit the way you want. So you'll see the technique is going to differ. You kind of need to just play with it, and you sort of need to just figure it out. And again, depending on your exact firearm, you may or may not get complete coverage. So you'll see in my case, I definitely needed to patch some things in. But for the most part, getting things going nice and flat and really pretty successful on the first side of the stock, learning how to work with this vinyl, taking my time, really trying to do a nice job to set myself up for the rest of the project, it definitely paid off. So the beginning and the setup and really getting things established is what's going to take the longest. Learning how to actually play with this particular vinyl and actually how it's going to react, the amount of heat you need to apply, the amount of pressure you need to apply, and how to sort of manipulate it to get it down and smooth and into place. But you'll notice I did do my best to try to wrap all the way around all the corners. Every single corner on this I did want to get covered so that when I put all my hardware and all my pieces back and into place, it really looked complete and there was no visible tan. So this here being the FDE from the original stock. I did my absolute best to wrap this completely. And I think overall I did a fairly good job. Now, working into all the cutouts and all the different areas for the hardware that I removed, this is definitely integral to the process. And again, making sure that I have the appropriate overlap so that all my covers and all my hardware pieces fit back over the top. You'll see by the end of this, it leaves a real clean look, very nice and desirable, and really gives it a little bit of a professional edge. Now, I did this luckily by chance, not because I really knew any better, but if I could offer you that little tip or trick, it'll definitely pay off. So take your time and wrap all the way into your cutouts, and then use your X-Acto knife to cut the vinyl back and out of those areas. But again, pressing down firm, just using your thumb, using your fingers, taking your time and pressing everything down and into place. Now, this is before applying your final heat. You will notice that one thing that you need to do at the very end is actually apply heat to this entire thing. But in the meantime, you can see this is starting out extremely well. And again, taking my time and cutting all these pieces, making sure everything fits down and where it needs to. Now you can see from time to time, adding some heat, really allowing everything to fit down and nice and really allowing it to seat into these tight little areas. Now on all of the open holes, you can see I pretty much just cut a star pattern into them and then using my pinky, sort of pressing down and into these holes to allow the appropriate overlap. Instead of trying to cut out a nitpicky little circle, I thought it would be best just for me to literally cut a star pattern and then press the excess down and into place. Once you get your bolts inside the holes, you really can't see that. And if anything else, it really does help to aid in properly wrapping these tight spots. So again, instead of trying to cut it out completely, just cut a nice little star pattern, maybe even apply a little bit of heat, and then just press everything down and into place. But then the final product on this side of the stock, very nice, extremely nice, and I am very happy with how this is starting. Now the other side of the stock is literally the exact same process. If I could do this again, I would have literally picked what I would call indexing points. So picking the dedicated spot on both sides. You can see this is a perfect mirror image on the vinyl. Well, if I was careful, I would have had a perfect seam right down the middle of the bottom of my stock. You can see here it's close, but not perfect. Again, I would have picked legitimate indexing points and made a mark with my Sharpie. So a couple little marks on the vinyl in strategic spots, one on each side, and strategic spots on the stock itself. I would have aligned everything perfectly, and I think the bottom would have matched a little bit better. But overall, not a big deal. You really can't tell too much. As you get into this and you continue to work, you gain a little momentum because you've already done this before. So following all the same techniques that I did on the first side, on the second side, you can see at this point coming out very nice and actually making some pretty good progress. Now that takes care of the actual butt end of the stock, but at this point, getting into the receiver area. So this is a little more material than I technically needed, and you can see here doing my best to get everything wrapped down around the bottom. Now this is where things got a little bit funny for me because I ended up with a whole bunch of overlap. I don't know exactly the best way to approach this, and honestly, I can't give you too much in the way of guidance. There are a couple of different things you could have done, whether or not you want to try to make a nice even seam and maybe just align your camo pattern to the best of your ability. But you can see I opted to wrap over the top of the existing vinyl, and it did leave some marks underneath the stock. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail later, but overall not too big a deal. Getting everything reassembled at this point, the back end of my rifle looking really good, going back together with ease. Absolutely fantastic. Taking my time, torquing everything up properly, making some minor adjustments with my heat gun, and at this point, this stock really coming along. Now the next thing for me is reloading on the coffee. Again, that's a big deal. So at this point, you can see definitely wearing on into the afternoon, but getting into the forend. Now this for me, again, is another opportunity to really get some good quality flat surfaces, just about perfect. I decided for me, I really wanted to get the bottom perfect because that's where theoretically you're actually establishing everything in the distance that's going to wrap up around the side of the rifle. So you can see here, taking my time, getting the bottom about as good as possible, and then wrapping up around the top. Now where I have a removable barrel, you'll see here I did wrap the vinyl all the way in and underneath where the barrel goes. Now, I do not believe it caused any tolerance issues for me. I pretty much wanted to do that to make sure that when I put the barrel back in, I had a real clean, professional look. I didn't want to see any gaps. I didn't want to see any of the FDE plastic from the stock sticking out. I really wanted everything perfectly wrapped. So taking my time, getting the vinyl into place, and then all the way in and underneath the stock. The one place where it really got funny is on the very front of the forend. You can see trying to wrap it, getting everything sort of overlapped. It was a little bit difficult and caused some wrinkles, and it was just a little bit unfortunate. But again, taking my time and cutting out all the holes, you can see this is a M-lock style forend. So it does have these slots that need to be cut out, again, using a very similar technique where literally I just cut a little bit of a star pattern and then just push the excess into the M-lock area. Leveraging an eraser to help me get into those tight areas, applying heat, and really pushing everything down where it needs to, even using the backside of my X-Acto knife to help me push everything down and into place. Taking my time, cutting out all my little tough areas. Generally speaking, I am very happy with how this went and how it came out. At this point, I'm into the 2.5 or 3 hour range in my project, but finally getting everything put together, assembling the forend of my rifle with the barrel, tightening everything up, getting it properly torqued, taking care of some of the final little funny spots and everything I need to do to get this rifle tuned up. Well, you can see at this point, putting it together, and absolutely beautiful. And well, at this point, demonstrating what went well and admitting to what went poorly. Overall, I would say very good presentation. I am happy with how this came out for the most part. Now, things that went very well. I am really happy with the fact that I took all the accessories off, got the gun skin laid into this, and then put them all back in. It gives it a real clean look overall, even though this is not very clean. And when you look super close, then you start to see some of those little nuances. But overall, when you just kind of look at the presentation here, generally speaking, very good. And that really is the case for both sides of the rifle. Actually, this being more of the presentation side, in some ways it did come out better. In other ways, not so much. So what are the things that kind of bother me and didn't go so well? Well, before we do that, let's talk about the positives. On these fairly flat sections, you can see it went very well. It did lay down very, very well. So through a lot of these sections, very nice. On the bottom here, this is like literally almost perfect. But it's when you really look up close that you start to see some of the things that bother me. Like, for example, you can see where there's overlap. So that is one thing. If you're not careful, you definitely get overlap. Now, do I care? No, but you can see there is overlap in a number of spaces. And that's certainly the case on the underside and then through some of these tricky locations, like through the handle. You can see here, this is really an inconsistent pattern with a ton of overlap here. And through the grip area, so areas where it was really difficult to get the appropriate amount of coverage. And then some areas where there's just like a legitimate cut. I mean, I tried to kind of fake it, I guess, a little bit and, make that look like a curve to kind of blend in with all the rest of it. But when you really look up close, that's when you start to see it. Now you can see as I threaded in this screw, basically at that point, this bolt going through there kind of twisted a little bit on the vinyl. Not a huge deal. And then here you can see areas where it is just a little bit left behind, a little bit sloppy in some of the cuts. But generally speaking, as I mentioned, it did a pretty good job. Where I'm extremely happy is where all of the factory parts mate up. I was careful to wrap the vinyl over the edges to give it a real clean look. And when you look at that, it is fantastic. I think that came out wonderfully. So around the receiver, that came out nice. Around the barrel, that's just about perfect. I'd say that is about as good as you could do. Even into the M-lock section on the forend, generally speaking, I'm very happy with that. So the main thing being really where all the tricky sections came together with some seams. Again, I tried to hide that to the best of my ability. And you will notice in other areas, little tiny bubbles. Could I get in with like a pin and sort of pop those? Yeah, probably. There are a number of spots with some wrinkles. So as you look in here, here's, some wrinkles, not the best. Another wrinkle here, not the best. And then up in the front, that's really where this is sort of the most messy. I wasn't even sure how to approach this. You can see the corners are just a disaster. It was kind of like trying to wrap a present with wrapping paper. So the corners here, not great. But overall, at least this has a pretty good coverage. I mean, 100% coverage for the areas that I wanted to get wrapped. And then again, just breaking it up by taking the stock parts off of this and then reassembling it. I think this actually came out pretty sweet overall. And so that's it for the Ruger 1022. But at this point, I still have a small project with my Mossberg 590. So let's check that out. And so now as we get into the shotgun, well, I have shot this in the past, so I definitely wanted to use a good degreaser. So following the instructions and the recommendations by GunSkins and using the Frog Lube degreaser. So now that this is fully prepped and ready to go, again, using some similar techniques to what I did on the rifle, taking my time, planning things out, and appropriately marking, measuring, and cutting. So again, use the same techniques, take your time, and plan on this taking a little while. You can see here on my shotgun, literally all I'm doing is wrapping my barrel. This is the last component to the actual shotgun and rifle kit. So on the rifle, I used most of the kit, but I also did have this barrel vinyl left over. So you can see here, working around my sights, taking my time, applying heat when needed, making some strategic cuts, and getting everything down and into place. Now, I do have to say this did not necessarily wrap around the entire barrel, so do not be surprised if your barrel is bigger in diameter than the vinyl. So you want to kind of take your time and be careful to make sure you get appropriate overlap down at the bottom where you can, so that you don't have too much of your barrel showing. The good thing I can say is with the shotgun, it does do a pretty good job of hiding the areas that don't have vinyl on them. This was just a little bit tricky because my barrel changes in diameter. So you need to use a little bit of heat to your advantage and help to really even things out. Now the barrel ring that allows me to install this does also need a piece of vinyl. So you can see, leveraging one of the leftover pieces that I had cut off earlier in the project to use to my advantage. Getting this cut, placing it all the way around, applying some heat, and then cutting it to the appropriate length. If you're not careful with this kit, you can stretch things out just a little bit. So don't apply too much heat, but just enough to get things to move the way you need. And the last thing is, always apply the final heat to the project. Apply heat over everything and make sure you're pressing down good and firm, getting everything to seat the way it needs. And then final assembly, well, here you go. You can see my Mossberg 590 Thunder Ranch Edition with a little extra KUIU bias on the barrel. Now, all in all, I am very happy with the GunSkins product. However, there are some things that I need to talk about, just being a little bit nitpicky. And I think this does have some merit. If you look at the actual legitimate licensed KUIU pattern on my jacket, which this is a KUIU jacket, you will see the size of the pattern. If you look at the actual size of the sort of different shapes, you'll notice how large this pattern really is. The size of each one of these sort of chunks of color is fairly substantial. The size of the black line thicker than my pinky. But when you look at other licensed KUIU products, like for example, I use licensed KUIU Kydex for my sheaths, these also have the appropriately sized patterns. However, with the GunSkins, unfortunately, they scaled down the pattern for some reason, and I don't really know why. And what it does is it actually changes the overall, I would say, profile and effectiveness of the camo. You have to imagine camouflage patterns are based on a macro pattern oftentimes and a micro pattern. Macro pattern being what it looks like at distance and the effectiveness blending into the background. The micro pattern when you're close up and the effectiveness of the camouflage to blend in with the background. Well, if you change the size of the pattern, you're technically changing the potential effectiveness of the pattern. And unfortunately, that's what GunSkins has done. So you can see the overall sort of color, granted very similar, actually has a slightly different impact and visual contrast than the licensed color, the official licensed color. And I'll show you, if you look at these ram heads, which here on the jacket and here on the vinyl are definitely different sizes. And again, that's because GunSkins, for whatever reason, scaled down the pattern to make it fit the vinyl. And unfortunately, that's not really, in my opinion, the right way to go. The actual pattern should remain the exact same size so that it has the intended effectiveness. So in essence, although very good, technically, even though this is the licensed KUIU Vias camouflage, it technically does not have the same effectiveness. But again, that's just me being very nitpicky. Overall, I do have to say, I definitely like the product. And so there you have it, a look at the GunSkins, in this particular case, in the camo Vias. So Kuyu Vias, I think this looks great. I mean, to each their own, and that's the awesome thing about GunSkins. Now, is this easy? No. Is it difficult? Not really. It's just kind of tedious. And each sort of medium has its own little techniques, and that's definitely the case with the vinyl GunSkins. I mean, you kind of need to learn along the way how it behaves. You sort of need to understand your own firearm and what it takes to actually get this wrapped. I mean, the geometry on every gun's going to be a little bit different. The features a little bit different. The cutouts a little bit different. So you kind of need to play with it. Overall, where do I think I went with this? Well, you know what? I think I did pretty good. I think this looks pretty awesome, and if you don't get too close, it actually looks fantastic. So definitely customizing my 1022. I am absolutely thrilled with this, and again, I'd like to say thank you very much to the people at GunSkins. And for the rest of you, if you like this content, do me a favor, take a look at my Outer Limitless YouTube channel, which is my primary channel. Everything from hiking, camping, and backpacking, excursions, and all the gear that goes with it. So from shelter systems, sleep systems, knives, backpacks, axes, flashlights, you name it, that's my Outer Limitless YouTube channel. So alright guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.